Hey class, welcome to chapter 2 lecture, where we're going to dive into some of the respiratory and the circulatory system. So hopefully this is beneficial to you. Let me share my screen. All right. So again, chapter 2, just brief introduction into the respiratory or cardiorespiratory system, a little bit of gas exchange, again, just for you to understand, again, what's going on at the micro level, which affects the macro level, which is, our results and things like that we're trying to get to as personal trainers or coaches and things like that. So again, the main idea here, the CV, so the cardiovascular system, so it transports nutrients and removes waste. So that's a big part, obviously, with our blood. Maintain the environment for all the body's functions. Again, we do a lot of things. Blood transports oxygens from lungs to the tissues. So again, we need oxygen. So when you breathe it into your lungs, it's like what happens with it? The blood is what carries it. And we'll look at that a little bit. And then blood transports carbon dioxide from tissues to lungs where it's removed from the body. So it's, again, that respiratory exchange that we've probably heard a million times, but then we're going to kind of look at how or why that happens. Just some things about blood first. Again, what is its function? So transport oxygen, nutrients, and metabolic byproducts, whether into the system or getting out of the system. What is it made up of? Plasma is about a little over half of it. Leukocytes and platelets, so white blood cells, and then clotting factors, and then erythrocytes, about 45%. So plasma is kind of the watery white part. So if you've ever seen blood separated, where you get that like egg white color and then the red at the bottom, the red is the actual solid part, the red blood cells, and then the plasma is the watery liquidy part that everything gets transported in. So there's a lot of that, and you want a lot of that. The pH of it, so basically how acidic or basic it is, normal is 7.4. So 7.4 is right in the middle of that scale, or excuse me, 7 is the middle of that scale. That'd be like water. So we're a little more basic most of the time. Now, not to go too far into it, but if your blood pH changes, even, I'm going to say a little bit, in the sense of like 7.2, 7.1, like you start getting that acidic, like that's really scary. Like your body doesn't react well. So it's a very fine line that our body tries to keep at what's called homeostasis. What causes deviations from that? So again, exercise to an extent, again, hopefully we can recover from it, stress, and then diseases. Buffers to that. So when you exercise, things like bicarbonate, sodium bicarbonate, increased ventilation, so breathing is going to help bring that from either an acidic position into a more basic, back to 7.4. And then how good your kidneys are at just functioning and filtering the metabolites and things like that as well. So again, blood pH normal 7.4. We change it a little bit, but we want our body to respond accordingly after that. And again, so here's just kind of what I was saying. Again, looking at it, plasma is mostly water. It's got a few proteins in it. If you ever like donated plasma before or anything like that, or even I think it was in an exercise physiology or a physiology lab where you put it in a blood in a centrifuge and it spins around, and then that's what separates the two. But again, then you got red blood cells, your white blood cells, and all of that. So transport, so oxygen transport. So O2, you'll see that for oxygen, is carried by something that's called hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is a protein within blood that carries this oxygen to, or through the blood to, whatever it needs to get to. And then, so a little bit of math, just so you understand it. So in healthy blood, we've kind of determined that about 1.39 milliliters of O2 per gram of hemoglobin. So if I had a gram of this oxygen carrying substance, about 1.39 milliliters of oxygen would be present in healthy blood. So what that gives you is about 15 grams of hemoglobin per 100 meters of blood, or you have 15 grams of hemoglobin. So then you would do 1.39 times 15. So in 100 milliliters of blood, you would have about 20.8 milliliters of oxygen, is kind of what they would say is the healthy scale, so to speak. And then this thing we're going to just touch on here, we'll skip over the slides for now, just because I don't think it's going to be that important for you. And I want to be efficient with our time. This oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. So basically just looking at the saturation. So how much oxygen is saturated on that hemoglobin at various different pressures throughout the system. Because you're going to have different pressures as you're going through your body. Pressure exerted by one gas in a mixture of gases. So again, how much oxygen pressure is there? And really what that means is as oxygen attaches to the hemoglobin, more oxygen wants to go to that area, and it becomes saturated. which is then going to be effective in delivery of that oxygen to the tissues or whatever you need. So the better or the more effective you are at that, the more effective you are getting oxygen to the system. Your tissues are able to do what they need to do, and you're probably hopefully able also to remove the waste, so to speak, the metabolites, the CO2 and other byproducts on the other end of that. And so that's really what that means, just kind of looking at that saturation. The more you can saturate hemoglobin, the more oxygen you're able to transport. Cardiac, so looking at the heart and just the anatomy of it, it is composed, again, of cardiac muscle. So again, it's different than skeletal muscle. It has 4 chambers, the left or the right and left atria. Each one's called an atria. We call them atrium for plural. And then the right and left ventricles. Now, I hope you don't get this too confused, but we want to look at that. You're looking at the heart as if you were looking at a person who is facing you. So really what we have is, this is the left atrium, the left ventricle, this is the right atrium and the right ventricle. Because again, you're looking at it from an anatomical position of the other person. So don't get too confused by that. Don't think just left to right as you're going through this. It is under involuntary control. Again, you don't have to tell your heart to beat every time. You don't have to tell it to speed up or slow down. Your body kind of responds to whatever stresses or non-stressors are on there. It has its own pacemaker. Again, we hear that those get implanted a lot again, but you can see kind of the nervous system that's attached to all of this. That's its pacemaker that it's talking about, this natural system of contractions. The order of them, so the SA node, which is up here, and then you have it go to the atrioventricular node, which is right down here. Then that spreads into the bundle fibers and the Purkinje fibers, kind of on this side. So you can see where it sends the signal down through the heart, and you'll see that contraction happen if you see a video of a heart contraction. That lub-dub, that 1-2 of our heart, boom, boom. What's happening is a contraction. The 2 contractions that are happening are caused by that nervous system kind of communication. And again, about 0.2 seconds. So that's a very fast reaction as we go. Electrocardiogram, or an ECG. So if you've seen these on every hospital show or health show or anything like that, you're kind of going like, what is it? This is actually showing you what's happening within your heart. And so we have these different sections. So P wave, QRS is usually put together, and then the T wave is kind of your whole system. And so what the P wave is, that little bump, again, and this is millivolts, so think electrical signaling, is an atrial depolarization. So this is when there's a change in electrical area of the atrium, so those top parts of the heart. And then you have the QRS, which is when the ventricular, so the ventricles, the big parts at the bottom of the heart, those are going through depolarization, or that contraction. And then but also during that time, the atrium is kind of relaxing, right? So you don't want both contracting at the same time. So you get what's called repolarization. And then the T wave is when the ventricles are repolarizing. And so you basically get your contraction, relaxation of the atrial while the ventricles are contracting, and then the ventricle relaxes. And so you get kind of this thing. So you can imagine, as your heart rate increases, if you've felt it or you've watched it like on a show where the heart rate goes beep, 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 what's happening very quickly is you're having these happening quicker or more frequently, right? Because the heart's beating faster. So you're gonna have more of these spikes kind of throughout. And sometimes we want that, right? We want our heart rate to increase, but sometimes we don't need it that high, and our body's kind of responding to a stress to it. So again, just understanding kind of the electrocardiogram. Again, I don't expect you to have to do these on your client or anything like that, but again, understanding what's going on with the heart is important for you. Circulation, so what the blood is doing or how it's going. Again, just stuff I need you to understand. So arteries carry blood away from the heart. So I always think arteries away, A and A. Typically very high pressure, right? Because you're closer to the heart. So the heart has pumped and it's going away from the heart to the rest of the body. Opposite of that, the veins bring blood towards your heart, right? So think kind of the back end, it's getting back to the heart so that it can go to the lungs to get reoxygenated. Typically lower pressure, and your muscles assist in the movement. So your veins, by the time the blood gets to your veins, it doesn't really have enough pressure from the heart to keep moving. That's why it's important that we move around. That's why when people sit for too long, like their legs will fall asleep or their legs will feel heavy, blood pools, right, so to speak, because they're not moving. So the actual muscle contractions help get that blood back to the heart, which is so important. Total peripheral resistance, just the definition of it. So the resistance of the entire systemic circulation. So again, just total resistance that's going on. When the vessels constrict, so blood vessels, when they constrict, right, you're going to have higher total pressure. And then when they widen or they dilate, right, you're going to have lower total pressure. And you want that exchange between both. You don't want them always constricted, and you don't want them always just nice and big. You want that pressure to change. So what changes that? So exercise, again, muscles or things that are asking for more blood are going to dilate. So there's going to be less pressure there. Sympathetic nervous system, local muscle tissue metabolism, again, that local muscle we just talked about, and then environmental stressors. So just things, and if you just think of when the body needs it, it typically is going to dilate, or you can have some type of reactions and the vessels are going to constrict. I've kind of understood this recently as like workouts for your blood vessels, where you kind of want this contraction relaxation of them. And one way to do that is a lot of people are recommending like cold showers. Again, we're really used to like hot showers and being relaxed. And what that's going to do is open up our blood vessels, right? So blood can remove the heat that we're generating, or that we're in a lot of heat, so it wants to cool us down. But then you take a cold shower, and what happens is the blood vessels constrict, because now the blood's going to go to the necessary parts like our organs and our brain. And so your blood vessels actually kind of get this workout by this exposure to cold weather, because we're also not used to that. So again, temporary pain or discomfort kind of for the improvement in that circulation totally is kind of the idea behind it. Looking at just the oxygen kind of, or where does our blood go during exercise and when at rest. So we'll look at rest first. So kind of at the bottom of this. So when you're at rest, so you've got about 5 liters of blood in you. And where is it all going? A lot of it's going to your organs. Some is still going, again, back to your heart, your kidneys, your bone, your brain, your skin, and then a little bit to your muscles, right? During exercise, though, again, the blood doesn't stay the same. This is where that constriction and opening of blood vessels kind of changes, right? When you're doing heavy exercise, my organs don't need as much, especially my digestive system, right? Because I'm not digesting anything, hopefully, at that point. Heart's still getting the blood that it needs, obviously. Kidneys aren't getting as much. The bones aren't getting as much. The brain is getting less. Skin could, depending on when you're trying to get rid of heat. So you could get a lot of blood to the skin level, right? We think about our face getting flushed red and things like that. And then obviously a lot of it is going over to your muscles, right? To fuel them, to provide water, oxygen, to remove waste, all those types of things. So just know that your blood doesn't stay consistent as you go, and you can see how much more blood you're pumping, right? In 1 minute, you're going to be pumping 25 liters of blood versus 5 liters, because your heart rate's probably increasing, right? Which means more blood's going to get circulated, and also where is it going, right? So just understand there's a difference between those things. That cycle, the events that occur from the start of one heartbeat to the start of another. So that's going to be that whole kind of PQRS cycle. So think lub dub, lub dub, lub dub. So in between each one of those. So relax, when our heart is relaxed, so that pause in between its reactions, we call that diastole or diastolic. That's when the heart's filling with blood. So you want that blood to be able to fill the heart so that the heart is then able to contract it out. When it's contracting, it's called systole or systolic. This is the blood ejected during the contraction. Okay. So this would be your systolic blood pressure, right? And we've probably heard blood pressure before. You get it taken every time you go to the hospital or to a doctor's appointment. You have your diastolic over your systolic, and we're looking at those numbers, or systolic over diastolic, excuse me. The rate pressure product, so the RPP, this is just how much your heart is working. And so what we look at, how you calculate that, is your systolic blood pressure, so the contraction pressure, and then your heart rate would give you your rate pressure product, okay? So if you have high systolic blood pressure and high heart rate, you're going to get a high rate pressure product. And I'm not sure the ranges of it or anything like that. I don't think you really need to understand that, but just know that there's a lot that goes into measuring the health of our heart. So if you're going to see a cardiologist or anything like that, just know those things. Again, diastolic blood pressure is the pressure when no blood is being ejected. So what is your blood pressure when the heart's not pumping? So basically, without you squeezing something to cause a reaction, right, a blood flow, what is the pressure going on inside of those inside of your blood? And then the mean arterial pressure, so the mean pressure throughout the cardiac cycle. So just while your heart is pumping, what is your mean, your average pressure throughout? Again, some definitions, and just, again, understanding the big thing here, diastolic and systolic blood pressure. A couple more definitions, some calculations that you'll need to look at and understand how to find them, or just remember the formulas for them. So cardiac output, or Q is the letter that's used for that, is the amount of blood pumped by the heart in 1 minute. So in 1 minute, how much blood is your heart pumping? So how do we find that? Is SV times HR's heart rate, so your heart rate, beats per minute. SV stands for stroke volume, so the amount of blood pumped per heartbeat. So you can see, so stroke volume, how much blood is being pumped per heartbeat, and then HR, how many times is my heart beating? And that's going to give you your total output, or your cardiac output. How do you calculate stroke volume? EDV minus ESV, so end diastolic volume. So at the end of your filling, so however much time, which is small in relative terms, how much blood fills it would be your total volume there. And then after it contracts, how much of the volume of that volume of blood is left in the heart, because you never really get all of it out of the heart. So that's going to tell you, so your end diastolic, let's just say I'm going to use 100, right? So you have 100, and then when you're left, you have 5. So 95 is your stroke volume. So then 95, we'll call it milliliters. And then let's say your heart beats 100. So you do 100 times 95, and that would give you how much blood is pumped by your heart in 1 minute. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. The Frank-Starling principle. So more LV is left ventricular. So that's the one that pumps, the left ventricle is what pumps out of into the aorta as you go. And so that's the more forceful contraction. And so that's going to lead to greater blood volume. So the more you can stretch it, so the more able that is to fill, think of it stretching like a rubber band a little bit. So as it fills and stretches, right, you're going to get more blood volume, because more of it's going to contract and leave the body, or leave the heart especially. And so that's just the Frank-Starling principle. So just understanding, most of the time we want that increased stretch in the heart. So this would come from like building up the muscle of the heart, right? The idea of cardio, right, is the point of improving the heart's function of pumping blood out within those heartbeats, right? And if you can stretch more, and you can decrease your need to increase your heart rate, right, then you're going to get greater output, and you're able to train at a higher intensity. Just a quick think, how would a stronger heart improve oxygen delivery? So just kind of taking everything that we just talked about. If I improve the strength of my heart, why would that improve my oxygen delivery? And so think about that. See if you can explain that to yourself or to somebody else. And then how would you expect exercise to affect these things? So cardiac output, stroke volume, and heart rate. So if I go from resting to heart rate, what's going to happen to my cardiac output? Is it going to increase or decrease? What about my stroke volume? And then what about my heart rate? And just kind of think about how we manipulate those things with exercise. Hopefully there's no questions so far. If you do, again, you can put them in the comments of the video, or on the page that I post this video. So hopefully that makes sense. So the respiratory system, again, what is its main function? Is the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. What's involved with it anatomically? You have your nasal cavities, your trachea, your left and right bronchi, your bronchioles, and your alveoli. So basically going from nostrils down the trachea, branches off, and then you got your smaller branches, and then all the way to the end with the alveoli, which is where the oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange occurs. But you can also see there's a lot of arteries and veins also involved in this. So the cardio system and the respiratory system are interlocked, and very much necessary for each other. Inspiration, so when we breathe in, they would consider it an active process, right? Where you do it on your own. Muscles used, the diaphragm, which is a giant balloon kind of shaped muscle underneath your rib cage, and then your external intercostal muscles. Now, again, just understanding you use your muscles to do it. Now, the contraction of the diaphragm lowers the air pressure in the lungs, so air moves in. So what essentially happens is, the reason why they call this an active process, one, because you're using muscles, but really there's a change in gas pressure. So this idea that you choose to breathe is a little different. What essentially has happened is, after I exhale, There is more pressure outside than inside, which is why air comes back in. So it's under our control, but it's also not. There's a reason why air goes in only to a certain extent. And then when you expiration, right, you exhale. It's passive at rest, right? We don't think about it while we're sleeping, so it's automatic. The diaphragm relaxes, it increases the pressure, and then that leads to air moving out as we go. During exercise, the internal intercostal muscles and abdominal muscles are involved. So while you're exercising, you're definitely using more muscle to get more oxygen in, right? Versus the passiveness of rest, your body's going, I need more oxygen. And so I'm going to use my muscles to help improve that inspiration and expiration of my muscles. Now, I've kind of done a deep dive since I've made this PowerPoint into breathing, or I've tried to understand it. A lot of us don't breathe very well, just in the sense of like chest breathing versus belly breathing versus full inhalation, using our diaphragm, all those sorts of stuff. And that's a whole nother kind of continuing education thing. If you're interested in that, and you're really heady and sciencey and you love this stuff, it's called Postural Restoration Institute, or PRI. They have tons of information out there. They have a bunch of classes you can take. I've needed them from my own physical therapist, just for my own ailments and just learning how to breathe properly and get out of these locked positions that I'm in, which has been eye-opening and humbling at the same time. Just the importance of breathing, that it's, even just like nasal breathing and mouth breathing, like which one's better for you, which ones can you improve on, which ones will improve your sleep, back pain, all those types of things. So if you're interested in that, again, it's called PRI, or the PRI Institute. And I can't recommend them anymore, just from the information that they provide. So again, expiration. So again, leaving the body. So the abdominals contracted. So think shortening. You can think about the rib cage kind of getting pulled down. If you think about that, kind of contracting over, not so much like a sit-up, but there's that contraction there, which is going to get the air out, right? Because we have increased the pressure. And then inspiration, the rib cage elevates. The external intercostals, they contract, which is going to kind of open things up. And the diaphragm, again, so the diaphragm is right here. Okay, so when it contracts, it comes down, which is going to allow air into the system. Okay, and then you can see here that diaphragm is relaxed and it's up a little bit higher. So that whole cavity area size decreases, right, as we go. So this gas exchange, again, O2 and CO2 diffuse between the alveoli and the capillaries. So if we broke it down, again, we looked at the lungs and it broke into the branches and then broke into the smaller branches. This is the end of those branches, right? These little air sacs, where this oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange occurs, And so you've got your air coming in. So mostly oxygen, very little carbon dioxide, right? Once it gets into the alveoli, or the alveolus, you still have much higher oxygen and much lower CO2. So the CO2 is going to go from high to low, right? So the CO2 is going to go into where there's less of it. So it's going to go into the alveolus. Opposite of that, there's more oxygen in the alveoli. So it's going to go into the blood, right? Into the capillary, basically, is where this exchange occurs, right? So in this picture, it's down here. So now my oxygen pressure increases. So now I have oxygen back in my blood and I have less carbon dioxide, not completely zero, but you have less of it as you go. Then that blood gets sent out of the arteries, right? Out of the aorta to the muscles, for example. Now the oxygen is going to be used by the muscle, right? Because the capillaries and the blood flow all goes there. You're going to lose that pressure of oxygen, more CO2. It's going to work its way back through the veins, back into the lungs, or the capillaries of the lungs, and you're going to get this exchange again, right? So hopefully that makes sense. Diffuse just means from high concentration to low concentration. So when you have more of something, if it can, it's going to move to where there's less of it. The way I use this as an example is if you drop food coloring, a single drop, into a cup of water, that concentration of red, for example, spreads throughout evenly. It doesn't stay as that single drop. It has the opportunity to diffuse out. And so if you think about that drop of oxygen coming in, it's going to diffuse to where it needs to go, where there's less of a concentration of it. And so that's kind of the exchange. Another thing with this breathing and everything that I've kind of been looking at, the more CO2 you are able to work through. so the more basically pain you're able to endure, so to speak, the greater affinity your body will have for oxygen. So you'll actually have greater oxygen uptake the more CO2 you can sustain during exercise, right? So let's just say, for example, so at the end of it, it says that the pressure of CO2 is 46. If you could get that to 52, for example, right, you're going to have an even higher, your body's going to even uptake more oxygen. And if it can uptake more oxygen, then it can use more oxygen. And then you actually might get a greater output. And so I know everyone focuses on oxygen uptake and oxygen saturation and things like that. But one of the books I was reading recently was just kind of challenging. It's like, no, we need to get good at being uncomfortable with CO2 in our bodies. The more CO2 we can kind of deal with, the greater that oxygen can be used and the more oxygen we can use. And so that was very interesting to me kind of as we go. And that goes into like breathing exercises. If you've done anything with like the Wim Hof method, which is kind of a newer version of the Tiamo breathing method from yoga, I believe, or Tibetan yoga. That's what it kind of does, where it challenges you to like exhale and then hold that for an extended amount of time to increase the amount of CO2 you have, right? But then the next time you breathe, you're going to increase the amount of oxygen that you take in. So all very interesting stuff. Again, just more rabbit trails we can go off of. So here's your blood flow. I think it's important to understand this. You will probably have a question on this, whether on your quiz or on your exam, needing to know the blood flow pathway. So no matter where you start from on this, you should know where everything is going. Okay, so let's do it from the right lung. So we'll start over here. So so it just came from, oh no, excuse me. Let's do this. We're going to do the blue. So we're going to do, so from the trunk and the head, right? All this blue is going to represent deoxygenated blood. Now, again, your blood's not blue. It's the illusion. It is still red. But anyway, so the blood is gone, it is low in CO2, or it's low in oxygen. And so it needs to get back to the lungs in order to obtain that oxygen and exchange its CO2. So blood from both the lower and upper body is going to come into the right atrium. Okay. It's going to move from the right atrium into the right ventricle. Okay. So into the big muscle here. That's going to contract. That blood is going to leave. It's going to go to the left and the right lung. So it kind of goes through these two here. Okay. It's going to go to the lungs, reoxygenate. Okay. Then it's going to come back to the heart. Okay. So this one from the right lung is going to come all the way here. From the left lung is going to come all the way here. It's going to go into the left atrium, into the left ventricle. This is the big one that we're focusing on, that pump from. So it's going to pump through what's called the aorta. And now you're getting blood to the oxygenated blood to the rest of the body. Now the cycle continues. So it goes to the rest of the body oxygenated. The body uses it, removes the oxygen, increases the CO2. That body, or that blood from the upper and lower body, comes back into the right atrium, and we go through the process all over again and again and again. So again, but you can start that from anywhere. So if I said, all right, we just got blood from the left and right lung, right? You would know you're in the left atrium. You go left atrium, left ventricle, rest of the body comes in through the superior and inferior vena cava into the right atrium, right ventricle. That's going to go to the lungs to get reoxygenated, and then we're back to the atrium. So again, just understanding the blood flow and where everything is going is important for you to understand. Oxygen uptake, or VO2. So again, we just kind of talked about this. The amount of O2 used by the tissues of the body. So again, as we just talked about this, the greater CO2 affinity, or the greater CO2 you can endure, the more O2 you can use. VO2 is related to the heart and circulatory system. VO2 max is a big thing, and we'll look at that in a second. What's called the Fick equation. So VO2 is equal to Q, so cardiac output. And then this A, VO2, that is the difference just between arterial and venous oxygen content. So you have this table down here, not to confuse you too much, but let's just use high exercise intensity, for example. So on the arterial side, so our arteries are going away from the heart to the muscles. You have 20 milliliters of oxygen per 100 milliliters of blood. And you have, and when it returns, it has 4 milliliters of oxygen, right? So you're basically, what was extracted was 16 milliliters. So your blood used 16 of the 20 milliliters, the muscles did, excuse me, of that oxygen for whatever purpose it needed. Okay. So your VO2 is going to be Q times that equation. Okay. Or that difference, so to speak. So 16 would be the difference here. So your VO2 max is the highest amount of O2 that can be used at the cellular level. So how much can your body extract, right, from how much can your oxygen, your cells extract from the blood? At rest for everyone, it's about 3.5 milliliters per kilogram per minute. Elite endurance athletes, so think very, very good long-term endurance, Tour de France, marathon runners, things like that, they can get all the way up to 80. So they are really, really good at extracting that O2 and using it at the cellular level. And that takes training. A lot of us are between 30 and 40, kind of our max VO2. But again, then you have these elite that are just really good at using that oxygen as they go. So we're not all going to get to 80. Most of us will never get that high, but just know the range is 3.5 at resting, basically nothing, sleep, and then you can get all the way to this extreme. And there's training to do that. So again, that's your oxygen uptake that we're kind of looking at there. And again, just like chapter 1, there are some review questions here. I want you to read through them. And then again, the answers are there as well after these. So read the questions, quiz yourself, do your best to answer them, and then you'll have the responses at the end. So hopefully chapter 2 is good for you, and I'll see you guys soon.